I had been home from a 9-month deployment for exactly 48 hours when my mother decided to treat my driveway like a hostage negotiation. Not a hug, not a thank God you made it home safe, not even one of those fake emotional Facebook mom speeches she loved posting online whenever somebody in uniform showed up at an airport. No, Evelyn came for my truck. I was standing in my driveway on base housing outside Savannah, Georgia, rinsing soap off my brand new black SUV when I saw my mother's white Lexus swing around the corner like she was arriving to inspect property she already owned. And technically in her mind she probably was. The SUV had cost me just over 60 grand. Every payment came from deployment bonuses, years of savings, and the kind of financial discipline you learn when you spend your 20s eating DFAC eggs that taste like punishment. I bought it 3 weeks before returning home because I had finally made captain. I told myself if I survived 9 months overseas, dealing with supply chain disasters, heat that felt personal, and lieutenants who thought Excel was advanced warfare, I could buy myself one nice thing. Apparently, my family disagreed. Brooke climbed out of the passenger seat wearing giant sunglasses and an outfit that looked expensive enough to have its own zip code. She waved at me with the energy of someone arriving late to brunch. "Wow," she said, staring at the SUV. "This is way nicer than I thought." That should have been my warning. My mother stepped out next. Perfect hair. Designer purse. That same tight smile she used whenever she was about to say something insane with complete confidence. She looked at me for maybe 2 seconds before pointing directly at the SUV. "Brooke needs this. No hello. No welcome home. Just a vehicle acquisition request like she was talking to Enterprise Rent-A-Car." I blinked water out of my eyes. "Excuse me," Brooke leaned against the passenger door of my SUV, like she was already emotionally attached to it. "For my new sales position," she explained. "The image matters." I stared at her. "The image clients expect professionalism," she said. This was funny coming from a woman who once got her debit card declined, buying scented candles at Target. My mother folded her arms. "And honestly, Harper, you live on base. You don't really need luxury." There it was, the family philosophy. Anything I earned became community property the second it looked valuable. Meanwhile, Brooke could light money on fire and somehow still be considered finding herself. I shut off the hose slowly. "So let me get this straight. I've been home 2 days. And you drove over here to ask for my car?" Evelyn actually looked offended. "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "We're talking about helping your sister. Helping." That word had carried more financial damage in my family than inflation. Brooke pushed her sunglasses onto her head and smiled at me like I was being difficult over something obvious. "You can always get another one later," she said. "You're military. Don't you guys get discounts on everything?" I laughed. I honestly couldn't help it. Not because it was funny, because sometimes your brain refuses to process stupidity without turning it into comedy first. My mother took my laugh personally. "I don't know why you're acting selfish," she said. "Brooke is trying to build a real career." I looked down at myself. Old Army PT shirt, cargo shorts, soap on my hands. Then I looked back at Evelyn. "A real career," Brooke sighed loudly. "Can we not do this? I have orientation Monday." I should explain something about my sister. Brooke had changed careers the same way normal people changed phone wallpapers. Real estate, fitness coaching, boutique skincare, luxury travel affiliate marketing. One time she spent 6 weeks calling herself a mindset entrepreneur, which apparently meant posting inspirational quotes while unemployed. Every failure somehow became somebody else's responsibility, usually mine. My mother walked closer and lowered her voice like she was trying to reason with a stubborn child. "You've always been good at sacrificing," she said. "Brooke just needs a little support." That sentence hit harder than she realized. Because she was right. I had always been the one expected to sacrifice. When Brooke needed tuition help, my parents couldn't afford to help me with textbooks. When Brooke wrecked her second car in college, my father quietly drained savings to replace it. When I enlisted at 18 because nobody planned to pay for my future, Evelyn told people I needed structure. But the second I succeeded on my own, suddenly everybody remembered we were family. Funny how that works. I tossed the sponge into the bucket. "No," I said. My mother's face hardened instantly. Brooke looked genuinely confused, like the word had never been used around her before. "What do you mean, no?" she asked. "I mean, this is my truck," Evelyn scoffed. "Don't start acting arrogant just because you made captain." That one almost impressed me. Only my mother could turn a military promotion into a personality flaw. Then Brooke did something that still makes me laugh when I think about it. She held out her hand for the keys, not joking, not asking, actually holding out her palm with this confident little smile, like the transfer was already approved. Like I was valet parking my own life. And right there, standing in my wet driveway after 9 months overseas, I realized something. They weren't embarrassed. They weren't hesitant. They genuinely believed they were entitled to whatever I had. I reached into my pocket slowly. Brooke smiled wider. Instead of my keys, I pulled out a wrinkled city bus pass I'd found in my uniform jacket earlier that morning. $2 fare, probably from 6 months ago. I placed it flat into Brooke's hand. Then I looked her dead in the eye. The eastbound route runs every 30 minutes. Silence. Absolute silence. My mother looked like her soul temporarily left her body. Brooke stared down at the bus pass like I had handed her radioactive material. "What the hell is this?" she asked. "Transportation," I said. Then I grabbed my keys, climbed into my SUV, and fired up the engine. The V8 roared loud enough to shake the garage door a little. I backed out while my mother was still standing there speechless, in her expensive sandals on my wet driveway. And honestly, that might have been the first peaceful moment I'd had since coming home. Have you ever had somebody treat your hard work like it belonged to them just because you shared the same last name? And if your own family demanded the keys to something you earned with years of sacrifice, would you hand them over or hand them a bus pass instead? Let me know in the comments. And subscribe for more real stories about family boundaries and self-respect. I drove around for almost an hour before heading back to base because I knew if I went home too soon, my phone would already be exploding. And I was right. 3 missed calls from my mother, 2 from Brooke, 1 text from my dad that simply said, "Please calm down," which was interesting because I had been perfectly calm the entire time. Apparently in my family, saying no counted as emotional instability. I parked outside my townhouse and sat there for a second with the engine off, looking at the reflection of the SUV in my windshield. The crazy part was I hadn't even bought that truck to impress anybody. I bought it because I could. That was new for me. Most of my life I was the kid people expected to understand. Brooke was the kid people invested in. There's a difference. When I was 17, Brooke got a brand new Jeep for her high school graduation. White leather seats, giant red bow on top. My mother cried while taking pictures in the driveway like she was watching a presidential inauguration. When I graduated the next year, my dad shook my hand and told me, "You're tough. You'll figure it out." That was it. No car, no tuition fund, no emotional speech. Just confidence in my survival skills. Honestly, he wasn't wrong. I did figure it out. I enlisted in the Army 3 weeks later. Not because I had some dramatic movie speech about patriotism and destiny. I joined because I needed a future health care and a paycheck that didn't involve asking my mother for permission to exist. The Army gave me structure fast. You learn real quick that nobody cares about excuses when you're standing in formation at 5 in the morning getting screamed at by a man who looks powered entirely by black coffee and hatred. But weirdly enough, I liked it. For the first time in my life, effort actually mattered. Not appearances, not favoritism, not who played tennis with my mother's country club friends. Results mattered. So I worked. I built my entire life the same way people build emergency bunkers, one careful layer at a time. I took online college classes between assignments and deployments. I earned my degree in supply chain logistics while Brooke was busy changing majors every semester like it was a Spotify playlist. I learned how to budget, how to invest, how to survive on less than I earned. Meanwhile, Brooke spent money like every credit card bill was a prank somebody else would eventually solve. And honestly, somebody usually did. My mother treated Brooke like a luxury brand that needed constant maintenance. Hair appointments, shopping trips, emergency rent money. Every financial disaster somehow became temporary because Evelyn always believed Brooke was one big opportunity away from becoming successful. Me. I became successful quietly, which apparently made it less exciting. Even after I made captain, my mother still introduced me to people like I was a side character in Brooke's story. "Oh, Harper's doing military logistics stuff," she'd say casually at family gatherings. Military logistics stuff, like I spent my days alphabetizing paper clips in camouflage. One Thanksgiving, one of her country club friends asked me what I actually did in the Army. Before I could answer, Evelyn laughed and said, "Mostly discipline and spreadsheets, I think." I had literally coordinated multi-million-dollar equipment movement overseas. But sure, spreadsheets. The funny part is she loved the social status of having a daughter in the military, just not the actual daughter. She posted patriotic Facebook tributes every Veterans Day with blurry photos she stole from my account. Half the comments called her such a proud military mom. Meanwhile, she couldn't remember where I had been deployed for 9 months. At one point, she told someone I was stationed in Germany. I was in Kuwait. Close enough for Facebook, apparently. I climbed out of the SUV and grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat. That truck represented 10 straight years of discipline nobody in my family ever noticed. Deployment bonuses, retirement contributions, investment accounts, 0 missed payments, no flashy lifestyle, no pretending to be rich online. I didn't buy designer bags to photograph next to restaurant drinks. I bought index funds, which is less glamorous but also less likely to get repossessed. The crazy thing is my family genuinely thought I was struggling financially because I never talked about money. I lived below my means. Military housing, practical routines. No need to show off. Meanwhile, Brooke treated every paycheck like she had won a game show. If she made $4,000, she spent $4,500. And my mother defended every second of it. She's young, she deserves nice things. She's building connections. No. Brooke was building debt with decorative throw pillows. I carried the duffel bag inside and dropped it near the couch before finally checking my phone again. Brooke had sent me a text. "You embarrassed me today." I actually laughed out loud. Not because it was funny. Because only Brooke could attempt to steal somebody's vehicle and still feel like the victim afterward. Then another text came through from my mother. "Family helps family. I hope the army hasn't turned you cold." That one sat with me for a minute. Because the truth was, the army hadn't made me cold. It made me harder to manipulate. There's a difference. When you spend years around people who take responsibility for their jobs, their mistakes, and each other, you stop tolerating adults who act like accountability is a hate crime. I walked outside to grab the rest of my mail from the small community mailbox near the curb. Mostly junk, coupons, a pizza flyer, some retirement investment packet. Then I saw one envelope stamped "Urgent Final Notice" in giant red letters. And weirdly enough, my stomach tightened before I even opened it. Because the name printed beneath my address wasn't mine. It was Brooke's. I stood there under the mailbox light, turning that envelope over in my hands while mosquitoes treated my ankles like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Brooke's name, my address, final collection notice. That combination alone already told me nobody in her life had things under control. I walked back inside, tossed my keys onto the kitchen counter, and opened the envelope with the same feeling I used to get opening operational reports overseas. You already know it's bad. You're just trying to figure out how bad. The letter came from some aggressive auto finance company with a logo that looked designed by people who repossess happiness for a living. According to the notice, Brooke's vehicle had already been repossessed 2 weeks earlier after multiple missed payments. Balance due just over $11,000. I actually sat down and read the letter twice because it made absolutely no sense at first. Brooke had a decent sales job. Not amazing money, but enough to pay for a car if you weren't spending like a divorced NFL player on vacation. Then I remembered Brooke's Instagram. Miami trip in February, Vegas in March, Napa Girls weekend in April. Every photo looked like a commercial for bad financial decisions. Bottle service, designer shopping bags, hotel rooftops, fake inspirational captions under pictures of expensive cocktails. One post literally said, "Manifesting abundance." Apparently, abundance manifested directly into a tow truck. I leaned back in my chair staring at the ceiling. Suddenly, the driveway ambush made a lot more sense. This was never about Brooke needing reliable transportation for work. This was about damage control. My mother had panicked because Brooke's car was gone, and my SUV had rolled into town at exactly the wrong time for them, or the right time depending on how comfortable you are stealing from family. I should have stopped there for the night. A normal person probably would have. But military logistics trains your brain to follow loose threads until the whole system makes sense. And something about that letter bothered me. Why send it to my address? Brooke hadn't lived with me, ever. I grabbed my laptop from my deployment bag and logged into my credit monitoring account. Mostly out of habit, I checked it every few weeks because identity theft around military personnel is ridiculously common. Long deployments make people easy targets. At first, everything looked normal. Credit cards fine, auto loan fine, mortgage fine. Then I saw it. One unsecured personal loan, $15,000. Opened 11 months earlier. Status severely delinquent. My stomach dropped so fast it honestly felt physical. I clicked on the account details, and for a second, My brain genuinely refused to process what I was reading. The loan wasn't just linked to my name. It had my social security number, my date of birth, my deployment mailing address. Every piece of information was accurate. Except for one thing, I had never opened the loan. I stared at the screen so long the laptop dimmed itself. Then training kicked in. Breathe, slow down, verify. I reopened the documents attached to the account. Electronic signature. Phone number, emergency contact. And there it was, my mother's cell number attached to the application. I felt something shift inside me right then. Not anger. Honestly, anger would have been easier. It was clarity, cold, ugly clarity. Evelyn hadn't shown up demanding my SUV because Brooke wanted something shiny. She showed up because they were drowning. And sometime during my deployment, my own mother had used my identity to throw Brooke a financial life raft. I pulled up the transaction history attached to the loan. Large withdrawals, luxury retail purchases, debt consolidation payments, one charge from a resort in Scottsdale that cost more than my first apartment rent. Unbelievable. Brooke wasn't struggling financially because life had been unfair. Brooke was struggling because she treated every paycheck like monopoly money while my mother cleaned up the mess behind her. Until she ran out of options and decided my credit score looked recyclable. I stood up from the table and paced my kitchen. I kept thinking maybe there had to be another explanation. Maybe my mother intended to tell me later. Maybe she planned to pay it back before I noticed. Maybe aliens landed in Georgia and taught my family fraud. Who knows? But the numbers didn't lie. The account was already severely delinquent, meaning they hadn't even been making minimum payments anymore. They had stolen my identity and still managed to fail at paying the fake loan. That honestly felt impressive. My phone buzzed again, mom calling. I let it ring. Then Brooke, ignored. Then a text from Evelyn appeared. You embarrassed your sister today. We need to discuss your attitude. My attitude. That almost made me laugh hard enough to choke. I typed out about 6 different responses before deleting all of them. Because at that point, I understood something important. The version of my family I had been trying to preserve didn't actually exist. There was no mutual respect hiding underneath the dysfunction, no secret appreciation, no delayed gratitude coming someday after Brooke matured. I was useful. That was it. Useful people don't get protected. They get managed. And suddenly a lot of little memories started lining up perfectly in my head. My mother asking weird questions about my deployment bonuses last year. Her casually asking if I still use the same bank. Brooke suddenly being extra nice to me during Christmas over FaceTime. Even my father acting strangely quiet whenever finances came up. Jesus Christ. Did Mitchell know that question bothered me more than I expected? Because my dad's biggest talent wasn't cruelty, it was silence. He could stand in the middle of a disaster and act like avoiding eye contact counted as conflict resolution. I sat back down and reopened the loan documents one more time. The electronic signature looked close enough to mine to fool a lender doing basic verification. Close enough to pass, not close enough to forgive. I took screenshots of everything, downloaded the account records, saved copies to 2 separate folders. By midnight, I had organized the entire thing like an army audit package. Evidence first, emotions later. Then I finally closed the laptop and sat there in complete silence. The room suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too honest. Because the truth was sitting right there in front of me now. My mother hadn't just tried to take my vehicle. A year ago, while I was overseas working 16-hour days, she had stolen my identity to protect Brooke from the consequences of her own life. They didn't just want my car, they had already taken my credit. And by the time the sun came up the next morning, every bit of shock inside me had frozen into something much colder. The icy look on my face walking into the bank matched the feeling that forged loan document left sitting in my chest all night. I was standing outside my bank at 7:52 the next morning, holding a black coffee that tasted like burned regret and government budgeting. The branch didn't even open until 8, but I'd been awake since 5, not pacing, not spiraling. Planning. That's one thing the military drills into you fast. When a perimeter gets breached, you do not waste time screaming about it. You secure the damage first. Emotions are for later. Containment comes first. By the time the doors unlocked, I already had screenshots, printed account records organized, and every document saved in 3 different places, like I was preparing for a congressional hearing instead of a Tuesday morning bank appointment. The branch manager introduced herself as Denise. Mid-50s, sharp blazer, the kind of woman who definitely corrected grammar in emails for sport. She smiled politely at me right up until I slid the forged loan documents across her desk. Then the smile disappeared immediately. "That's not your signature," she asked. "No, ma'am. You never authorized this account, no." "Do you know the individual connected to the emergency contact number?" I paused for exactly 1 second. "Yes," I said. Unfortunately, Denise gave me the same look doctors probably give people, right before explaining expensive medical problems. Then we got to work. Fraud affidavit, identity theft report, credit dispute paperwork, verification process. At one point, she asked if I wanted to contact the other party first before escalating the claim. I almost laughed. The other party was my mother. There really isn't a Hallmark card section for that conversation. Instead, I shook my head. I'd like to proceed formally. And honestly, hearing myself say that out loud did something to me, because until then, part of my brain still thought maybe I was overreacting. Family has a weird way of training you to question your own boundaries. But sitting there in that office looking at forged documents tied to my social security number made everything painfully simple. This wasn't family drama. This was financial fraud. Denise typed quietly for a minute before looking back at me. "We're also going to recommend a hard freeze on your credit immediately. Already planned on it." She nodded like she appreciated competence. Honestly, the whole process felt weirdly calm. No tears, no dramatic speeches, just paperwork. The Army had prepared me for this better than therapy probably would have. You learn to separate emotion from action when things go sideways. Panic wastes time. Systems solve problems. By 8:47 a.m., my credit was frozen across all 3 bureaus. The fraudulent loan had been flagged for investigation. Additional verification alerts were added to my accounts. And for the first time since opening that envelope the night before, I finally felt something close to control returning. Then I remembered something. Actually, several somethings. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Denise noticed immediately. "Anything else connected?" she asked. "Oh yeah," I muttered. More than I should have allowed. See, there was one stupid habit I had carried for years, because keeping peace in my family always seemed easier than confronting reality. I paid for things quietly, not huge things, just enough to make everyone's life smoother. 5 years earlier, my parents had complained about money being tight after some insurance increase. My dad mentioned possibly dropping their backup vehicle coverage. So I stepped in. Then Brooke temporarily needed help staying on the family cell phone plan after changing jobs. Temporary somehow lasted half a decade. Every month, about $400 left my account through automatic payments tied to my parents. Phone plan. Secondary car insurance. A roadside assistance package my mother absolutely did not need, but insisted was important protection. It had become background noise financially. And honestly, part of me liked feeling useful. That's the trap sometimes. If your entire role in a family becomes solving problems, eventually people stop seeing your help as generosity. They start seeing it as infrastructure. I handed my phone to Denise. "Can we stop all of these auto drafts today?" She scrolled through the list. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. All of them, every single one. No warning text, no discussion, no family meeting. Because I finally understood something sitting in that office. People who will steal your identity do not deserve a courtesy transition period. Denise started processing the cancellations one by one. Click, cell phone payment removed. Click, insurance auto draft terminated. Click, secondary account access revoked. Each sound felt strangely satisfying, like cutting wires on a bomb. I kept imagining my mother discovering the cancellations later. Not because I enjoyed revenge. Honestly, this wasn't revenge anymore. It was perimeter security. The hardest part was realizing how normal all of this had once felt to me. For years, I had accepted being the responsible one, the dependable daughter, the low-maintenance child. Brooke got emotional support. I got automatic withdrawal confirmations. And the worst part, nobody had even asked me recently if I still wanted to keep paying those bills. They just assumed I would. That's the thing about unhealthy family dynamics. The exploitation eventually becomes administrative. Denise handed me the final confirmation paperwork. "All recurring external payments have been removed," she said. I signed the last form. Her pen clicked sharply when she pulled it back. Tiny sound, but it felt final, like a door locking. I thanked her, grabbed my folder, and walked out into the parking lot. The Georgia heat hit immediately. My phone buzzed before I even reached the SUV. Brooke, ignored. Then my mother, ignored. Then another call, then another. Apparently, the financial life support machines had already started flatlining. I climbed into the truck and closed the door. Silence. Real silence. Not the fake peace my family always demanded where everyone swallowed resentment to keep Evelyn comfortable. Actual peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't financially tied to them anymore. No shared obligations, no quiet subsidies, no invisible leash disguised as loyalty. I started the engine and drove home without answering a single call. And 3 days later, the sharp metallic click of my parents' front gate opening for their annual Memorial Day barbecue sounded almost identical to the final click of Denise's pen, confirming every cancellation that morning at the bank. I parked 3 houses down from my parents' place because every driveway spot was already full of oversized SUVs, pickup trucks, and 1 silver Mercedes my Aunt Dana leased every 2 years strictly for emotional reasons. The Memorial Day barbecue was a yearly tradition in my family. Translation: 40 relatives pretending everything was fine while secretly judging each other's finances through potato salad and beer. I grabbed the bowl of potato salad from my passenger seat and walked toward the house wearing jeans boots and a plain black t-shirt. No uniform, no medals, no military small talk bait for Evelyn to parade around in front of guests. Just me. The second I opened the side gate, I could smell charcoal smoke and hear my Uncle Rick arguing loudly about interest rates with somebody near the grill. Kids were running through the yard with water guns. Classic suburban chaos. Normal. Which honestly made the situation feel even stranger. Because I already knew this entire barbecue was sitting on top of a financial sinkhole my mother was desperately trying to keep hidden with decorative napkins. My father spotted me first. Mitchell stood near the cooler wearing white New Balance sneakers and the facial expression of a man who hadn't slept properly in 3 days. He walked over carefully, not warmly, carefully. "Hey, kiddo," he said quietly. I handed him the potato salad. "Hey, Dad." He glanced around before lowering his voice. "Your mother's upset." I almost admired how wildly insufficient that sentence was. Upset. Like she'd received the wrong Starbucks order instead of committing identity fraud. "She'll survive," I said. His shoulders tightened. That told me everything I needed to know. Mitchell knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. And like always, he had chosen silence because silence kept the house peaceful for him. That's the thing about enablers. They act innocent because they aren't the loudest person in the room. But silence can do a lot of damage when it keeps protecting the wrong people. Before he could say anything else, the back door flew open. Evelyn. Even from across the yard, I could tell she was furious. Not emotional, not hurt. Furious. There's a difference. Hurt people usually ask questions. Furious people start calculating blame. She marched straight toward me with that tight country club smile plastered across her face for public viewing. "Harper," she said through clenched teeth. "Kitchen, now." My Aunt Sarah looked over from her lawn chair. "Oh good, both daughters are here," she smiled. Brooke wasn't outside. Interesting. Probably hiding until her financial life rebooted. I followed my mother into the kitchen while relatives laughed outside pretending America hadn't collectively agreed to cook meat every holiday regardless of temperature. The second the kitchen door swung shut behind us, Evelyn dropped the fake smile immediately. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she hissed. There it was. Not, "Did you accuse me of fraud?" Not, "Can we talk about this?" Straight to aggression. Very on brand. I leaned against the counter calmly. "You'll need to narrow that question down." Her eyes flashed. The phones got shut off. The insurance payment bounced. Sounds inconvenient, and Brooke's credit cards are declining. That one almost made me laugh. Almost. Because apparently her biggest concern wasn't the forged loan. It was Brooke being publicly separated from modern banking. Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice even more. "You humiliated your sister." "No," I said calmly. "The repo company did that." She pointed a finger directly in my face. "You have completely lost perspective since coming home." That sentence irritated me more than I expected, because suddenly I understood her strategy. Deployment. That was going to be her angle. Not fraud, not manipulation, not theft. She was going to paint me as unstable. I crossed my arms. Interesting choice of words. "Oh, don't start with me," she snapped. "You're clearly angry, emotional, paranoid." Paranoid people usually imagine the fraud mom. Her jaw tightened so hard I thought she might crack a tooth. For a second, neither of us spoke. The sounds from outside drifted into the kitchen. Laughter. Plates clattering, somebody opening another beer. Regular family noises. Meanwhile, my mother stood 3 feet away from me trying to gaslight a federal crime into a personality issue. Honestly, it would have been impressive if it weren't so pathetic. Then Brooke finally appeared. She walked into the kitchen wearing white jeans and oversized sunglasses indoors like a celebrity hiding from paparazzi instead of visa statements. The second she saw me, her expression twisted immediately. "This is insane," she said. "My cards got declined at brunch." I stared at her. "Brunch. Not, I'm sorry. Not, can we fix this?" Brunch inconvenience had apparently reached emergency status. "You'll survive," I said. Brooke scoffed. "You don't understand how humiliating that is." I actually laughed that time. "No, Brooke. You know what humiliating is. Finding out your own mother committed identity theft while you were overseas." Evelyn immediately cut in. "Keep your voice down. Interesting. Not deny it. Just lower the volume." That told me everything. Then she moved in close enough for me to smell her expensive perfume and pure desperation. "You are going to restore those payments today," she whispered sharply. "And you are giving Brooke the SUV." I blinked slowly. "You cannot be serious. You owe this family after the embarrassment you caused." Embarrassment. Again with that word. My mother cared more about appearances than morality. Always had. Fraud wasn't the problem. Public exposure was. I shook my head once. Not happening. That's when her expression changed completely. Cold, controlled, dangerous. "Fine," she said quietly. "Then I'll walk outside right now and explain to the family that you've been behaving irrationally since returning from deployment." Wow, there it was. Weaponized concern, the classic move. Suddenly I wasn't a victim of fraud anymore. I was the unstable soldier struggling emotionally after overseas service. I could practically hear the sympathy already. Poor Evelyn, poor Brooke. Harper came home different. My mother folded her arms like she'd already won. "You know people will believe me," she said softly. And honestly, for most of my life they probably would have, because calm people rarely explain themselves first. Manipulative people do. I looked at her for a long second. Then I smiled. Not warmly, not emotionally. Just enough to make both her and Brooke visibly uncomfortable. "Let's go tell them right now." The confidence vanished from Evelyn's face instantly. Before either of them could react, I grabbed the screen door handle, and pushed it open toward the crowded backyard full of relatives. I walked straight across the patio, while my mother hurried behind me like a politician chasing a microphone she suddenly regretted handing over. "Harper," she whispered sharply. "Stop this right now." I kept walking. The backyard was packed. Probably 40 people total. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, who technically weren't related but had attended enough cookouts to qualify emotionally. Kids were still running around with water guns, completely unaware they were about 30 seconds away from witnessing the collapse of my mother's carefully managed family image. My Uncle Rick looked up from the grill. "There she is," he shouted. Captain America finally joined us. A few people laughed. Normally I would have smiled politely. Instead, I stepped into the center of the patio near the picnic tables and stopped. That alone got everyone's attention, because I'm usually quiet at family gatherings. Not shy, just observant. Years of military briefings teach you that people reveal a lot when you stop competing to be heard. Behind me, Evelyn suddenly grabbed my forearm hard enough to dig her nails into my skin. Then she laughed nervously toward my Aunt Sarah. "Harper is just exhausted," she said quickly. "Deployment has been stressful." There it was again, that same strategy. Make me emotional before I could become credible? Aunt Sarah frowned immediately. "Oh, honey, are you okay?" I slowly removed my mother's hand from my arm. Then I looked around the yard calmly, at my cousins holding paper plates, at my uncle halfway through a hot dog, at Brooke frozen near the back door, looking like she wanted the earth itself to open beneath her designer sandals. Then I spoke. Not loudly, I didn't need to. The Army teaches you something useful about authority. Real authority doesn't usually scream. "I'm not exhausted," I said evenly. The entire yard quieted almost instantly. I looked directly at Evelyn. "I'm just finished being defrauded." You could actually feel the atmosphere change, like oxygen had become expensive. My mother's fake smile twitched. "Harper," she warned softly. I ignored her completely. Then I reached into the messenger bag hanging from my shoulder and pulled out a thick manila envelope. That envelope had become weirdly comforting over the last few days. Facts are calming. Evidence is calming. People can argue with feelings all day long. Documents are harder to gaslight. Mitchell stepped forward finally. "Maybe we should discuss this privately," he muttered. "No," I said calmly. We should have discussed identity theft privately before it happened. My cousin Danielle blinked. Identity theft. Brooke immediately jumped in. Oh my God, this is so dramatic. I held up one finger without even looking at her. And to everybody's surprise, including hers, she actually stopped talking. Years of briefing officers overseas apparently gave me better crowd control than my own family expected. I opened the envelope and removed the loan documents. Then I started reading. Again, not emotionally, just clearly. 11 months ago, a $15,000 personal loan was opened under my name while I was deployed overseas. Complete silence. The account used my social security number, military information, and forged signature. Aunt Sarah slowly lowered her drink. My Uncle Rick looked over at my father with the expression of a man realizing Thanksgiving was about to become unforgettable forever. Evelyn folded her arms tightly. You're misunderstanding the situation, she snapped. No, I said calmly. I understood it perfectly after the fraud department confirmed it. That landed hard. Because up until then, maybe people thought this was family arguing about money. The word fraud changes the room. Fast. I pulled out another document. Also, Brooke's vehicle was repossessed 2 weeks ago after multiple missed payments. Every head in the yard turned toward Brooke immediately. She went pale. Honestly, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Then I remembered she stood in my driveway asking for my SUV like she was borrowing a sweater. Brooke crossed her arms defensively. I was going through a difficult period financially. You were in Napa Valley 3 months ago, I replied. A couple cousins exchanged looks immediately. One of them actually coughed, trying not to laugh. Evelyn stepped forward again. Family helps each other. I nodded once. Correct. Family helps each other. They don't forge military loan documents. That one hit like a brick. My father looked physically ill now. And the crazy thing, I still hadn't yelled once. Not one time. That's what really unsettled them. Calm truth is terrifying when people are used to controlling emotional reactions. I reached back into the envelope and pulled out a stack of bank statements. These, I said, are 5 years of automatic payments from my account. I held them up slightly. Cell phone plans, secondary car insurance, emergency expenses. I looked around the yard. About $400 a month. My Aunt Dana frowned. Wait, you were paying their bills? For years, I answered. Brooke immediately scoffed. Nobody asked you to do that. That almost impressed me. Imagine saying that while benefiting from it for half a decade. You're right, I said. Nobody asked. They just expected. That line landed differently. You could feel it. Because everybody in that yard, knew my mother's patterns. The image management, the favoritism, the constant obsession with appearances. They just never saw the financial side up close before. Evelyn finally lost patience completely. You are humiliating this family over money. And there it was again. Money, always money, never accountability, never the forged signature, never the fraud. Just embarrassment management. I looked directly at her. No, I said, quietly. I'm exposing what you did because I'm done protecting people who keep sacrificing me to protect Brooke. That sentence hit my father harder than anybody else. I saw it immediately. Mitchell looked down at the ground like somebody had finally forced him to hear every silent thing he'd ignored for years. Brooke's eyes filled with tears. Not remorseful tears. Panicked tears. The kind people cry when consequences finally become public. And honestly, that backyard suddenly felt more honest than our family had been in decades. No pretending, no fake smiles, no carefully managed narratives about successful daughters and loving parents. Just facts sitting in the open air next to hamburgers and potato salad. I slid the papers back into the envelope carefully. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even the kids had stopped running around. The entire barbecue had frozen solid around the truth. The lively chatter disappeared so completely that the only sound left was the soft hiss of grease dripping onto the grill. Even the smoke hanging above the backyard looked like it had stopped moving. The silence in that backyard lasted maybe 3 seconds before Brooke started crying. Not quiet crying either. Full performance crying. The kind where somebody covers their mouth dramatically, like they're auditioning for a medical drama nobody asked for. I was going through a hard time, she said between sobs. Nobody understands the pressure I was under. My cousin Tyler looked down at his paper plate so fast I thought he might accidentally headbutt the macaroni salad. Because everybody there knew Brooke's version of pressure usually involved luxury shopping and consequences arriving unexpectedly. Evelyn rushed toward her immediately. Of course she did. My mother treated Brooke's tears like national emergencies. She wrapped an arm around her while glaring at me like I had personally invented debt collection. "Look what you're doing to your sister," she snapped. I stared at her calmly. "No," I said. "Look what you did to your daughter." That hit harder than yelling would have, because Brooke wasn't born entitled in a vacuum. Evelyn built that system brick by brick for years. Every excuse, every bailout, every consequence removed before it could teach anything useful. Now everybody in the family was finally watching the result in real time. Brooke wiped her eyes angrily. "You have no idea what it's like trying to keep up with people our age." I blinked once. Keep up with who? Influencers? A couple relatives looked away fast, trying not to laugh. Honestly, the situation would have been less insane if it weren't so familiar. This was the family pattern. Brooke creates disaster. Evelyn reframes disaster as emotional hardship. Everybody else quietly absorbs the damage. Except this time, the bill landed in my name. My mother pointed directly at me. "Family relies on each other," she said sharply. "That's what decent people do." There it was again, that word, family. Manipulative people love using the word family right before asking you to tolerate something criminal. I folded my arms slowly. "You forged a loan under my identity. It was temporary. You stole my identity. We were going to fix it. You let it go, delinquent." Brooke suddenly cut in again. "You're acting like we robbed a bank." I actually looked at her for a second, trying to figure out whether she genuinely believed that sentence helped. Then my father finally moved. Mitchell stepped into the middle of the patio, looking like a man who had just realized avoiding conflict for 25 years eventually creates larger conflict. His face had gone pale, not angry, not defensive, just exhausted. Honestly, it was the first truly honest expression I'd ever seen on him. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "tell me this isn't true." My mother immediately straightened up. That tone in his voice scared her more than my evidence had. "It's complicated," she snapped. "No," he said, "it really isn't." The entire yard stayed dead silent watching them. I think that was the moment my father finally understood the illusion was over. Not the financial illusion, the family illusion. The idea that keeping peace was somehow protecting everyone. It wasn't. It was protecting dysfunction. My Aunt Dana crossed her arms. "You used Harper's identity." Evelyn looked around desperately now. "You people are acting like I committed some violent crime." That sentence was unbelievable even for her. My Uncle Rick let out one stunned laugh. "Evelyn," he said, "identity theft is a crime." She looked furious that legal definitions existed. Meanwhile, Brooke kept crying into a napkin like she was the emotional centerpiece of the tragedy. And honestly, that used to work. In our family, Brooke's emotions had always overridden reality. If Brooke cried, conversations ended. If Brooke struggled, standards disappeared. If Brooke failed, somebody else paid. Usually me, but standing there in that backyard, something inside me had completely detached from the old system. I wasn't trying to win approval anymore. That changes everything. I looked directly at my mother. "It's not about money." She opened her mouth immediately. I cut her off. "It's about the fact that you treated me like an ATM while treating Brooke like a queen." Nobody moved. Nobody even touched their food anymore. "You didn't ask for help," I continued evenly. "You committed a felony." That word landed like a grenade in the middle of the barbecue. Felony. No soft language left. No family spin. No emotional camouflage. Just reality. Brooke shook her head frantically. "Mom was only trying to help me." I looked at her calmly. "And that's exactly why you never learned how to help yourself." She looked like I slapped her. But it was true. Evelyn had spent years protecting Brooke from discomfort, responsibility, embarrassment, accountability. Basically every experience required to become a functioning adult. Then I reached into the manila envelope one final time and pulled out another document. Official, stamped, very real. The police report. I handed it directly to my mother. For the first time all afternoon, Evelyn genuinely looked scared. Not angry, scared. "The fraud department will be contacting you Tuesday," I said. Her fingers tightened around the paper. "You filed a police report against your own family." That question told me everything about her mindset. Not why did this happen, not how do we fix it. Just disbelief that consequences had finally crossed the family boundary. I nodded once. "I suggest you find a good lawyer instead of a free car." The look on Brooke's face was unbelievable. Like she genuinely thought consequences only happened to other people. Mitchell sat down slowly in one of the patio chairs, like his knees stopped cooperating. My Aunt Sarah looked physically sick. Somebody near the grill quietly turned off the burners. Even the neighborhood noise outside the fence suddenly felt far away. And weirdly enough, I felt calm, not happy, not vindicated, just finished. That's the only word for it. Finished carrying people who kept confusing my sacrifice with obligation. Finished funding dysfunction disguised as family loyalty. Finished shrinking myself so Brooke could remain the center of my mother's universe. I slid the remaining documents back into the envelope carefully. Nobody stopped me. Nobody argued anymore. Because once truth becomes public, manipulation loses oxygen fast. I turned away from the patio without another word. Behind me, I could already hear overlapping voices starting. Questions, arguments, panic. My mother saying my name sharply, Brooke crying harder, Mitchell trying to calm people down 20 years too late. But I didn't look back. I walked through the side gate out toward the street and unlocked my SUV while the sound of my family finally collapsing behind me faded into the warm Georgia evening. I sat inside my SUV for a few seconds with both hands on the steering wheel while my phone started vibrating like it was trying to escape the center console. Texts, calls, more texts. Apparently, the family barbecue had officially turned into live entertainment. I glanced at the screen at a red light a few blocks away. Aunt Sarah, I had no idea. Uncle Rick, call me when you can. Cousin Danielle, honestly. Good for you, Dad. Please come back so we can talk calmly. That last one almost made me laugh. Calmly, my father had spent 20 years avoiding conflict so aggressively that the family practically needed a PowerPoint presentation before discussing basic reality. Now suddenly he wanted healthy communication. Amazing timing. I muted the phone and kept driving. The crazy thing was, I didn't feel guilty anymore. Not angry either, just tired in a very specific way. Like carrying a refrigerator upstairs for 10 years and finally realizing you were allowed to put it down. I drove back toward base with the windows down while the Georgia heat rolled through the cabin. And for the first time since coming home from deployment, my chest didn't feel tight anymore. Because the truth was finally out, not edited, not softened, not rearranged into one of Evelyn's fake narratives. The real version. The version where the responsible daughter quietly funded everybody while being treated like backup equipment. The version where Brooke kept failing upward because nobody ever let consequences reach her. The version where my mother valued appearances so much she committed. Fraud instead of admitting her favorite child was financially drowning. I didn't answer a single message that night, not one, because validation from relatives suddenly felt meaningless. Where had all this support been while I was wiring birthday gifts home? From overseas while eating microwave chow hall food at midnight. Where was this outrage when my family treated my success like public property? People love supporting boundaries after somebody else finally pays the emotional cost of setting them. Around 10 that night, my dad left a voicemail. I listened to it once. He sounded exhausted, older somehow. Your mother made mistakes, he said quietly. But she was trying to help your sister. That sentence told me everything. Even now, he still couldn't say the actual words. Fraud, forgery, identity theft. Mistakes sounded smaller, cleaner, like accidentally overcooking chicken instead of committing a felony against your own daughter. I deleted the voicemail. 3 days later, the fraud investigator called me for additional documentation. 2 days after that, Evelyn finally contacted me directly through email instead of text. Not an apology, of course not. A negotiation. She wanted me to withdraw the report for the sake of the family. That phrase almost deserved an award for consistency. The family, always the family. Funny how protecting the family only seemed to involve sacrificing me. I ignored the email. Then the real fallout started. Turns out banks take forged military loan documents pretty seriously, especially when electronic records, phone numbers, and payment histories all point directly back to the same household. Evelyn spent the next several weeks bouncing between attorneys, bank representatives, and fraud investigators, trying desperately to avoid criminal charges. Eventually, she drained a huge chunk of her personal savings, settling the delinquent loan balance and cooperating with investigators to avoid the situation escalating further. Watching my mother suddenly discover accountability at 58 years old was surreal. Apparently, consequences do arrive eventually. Sometimes they just carpool. As for Brooke, reality hit her like a folding chair. Without my payments quietly covering family expenses anymore, everything collapsed fast. Her credit cards got frozen. Her apartment situation became unstable. And since nobody in the extended family trusted her financially after the barbecue disaster, the emergency bailout network suddenly disappeared. It's amazing how quickly people stop volunteering support once they realize the story has legal paperwork attached. Brooke ended up taking a minimum wage retail management job across town. And yes, she literally started taking the bus, the same city route I handed her in my driveway. Honestly, life has a dark sense of humor sometimes. A few months later, I saw her completely by accident outside a grocery store near downtown Savannah. She was standing at a bus stop in a wrinkled work polo, holding 2 plastic grocery bags, and looking absolutely furious at the weather. For a second, I almost pulled over, not to apologize, not to rescue her, just because part of me still remembered she was my little sister before all this turned toxic. Then I remembered something important. Helping somebody survive is different from helping them avoid adulthood forever. So I kept driving. And weirdly enough, that was harder than exposing everything at the barbecue. Because boundaries sound empowering online, until you actually have to maintain them with people you love. That's the part nobody talks about. The loneliness afterward. The silence. The uncomfortable realization that peace sometimes costs relationships. But you know what costs more? Spending your entire life setting yourself on fire, so entitled people can stay warm. I spent years thinking being the good daughter meant endless sacrifice, money, time, patience, forgiveness. Meanwhile, nobody asked what carrying all of that was doing to me. Real family protects your peace. They don't exploit your discipline while rewarding irresponsibility. They don't turn your success into a resource pool for someone else's bad decisions. And they definitely don't steal from you while demanding gratitude. The biggest lesson I learned through all of this wasn't financial, it was emotional. People who truly love you will respect your boundaries even when those boundaries inconvenience them. People who only love access to your resources will call those same boundaries selfish. There's a difference. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. My life became quieter after that summer, smaller in some ways, but healthier. No hidden payments, no guilt-driven obligations, no emergency calls demanding rescue missions for problems I didn't create. Just peace, actual peace. And honestly, that turned out to be worth a lot more than $60,000. Have you ever had a family member demand the rewards of your hard work while completely disrespecting the struggle behind it? Would you have handed over the keys or the bus pass? Let me know your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life lessons about family boundaries and self-respect. A few months after everything happened, I was sitting in my living room folding laundry when I realized something that honestly bothered me more than the fraud itself. For years, I had built my entire identity around being useful, not loved, useful. And a lot of people watching this probably understand exactly what I mean. Every family has roles whether they admit it or not. There's usually the difficult one, the golden child, the peacekeeper, the invisible one. And then there's the person everybody quietly depends on to hold things together. That was me. The reliable one, the responsible one, the one who always figured it out. And at first that role feels good. People compliment you for being mature, independent, strong, low maintenance. But after a while you start realizing something uncomfortable. Sometimes people praise you for being easy because it benefits them when you need nothing. That hit me hard after the barbecue. Because once I stopped paying bills, fixing problems, and absorbing dysfunction quietly, I started seeing people differently. Certain relatives stopped calling as much. Certain conversations disappeared completely. Some family members suddenly acted uncomfortable around me, not because I had lied, but because I had disrupted a system everybody had adapted to. And honestly, that hurt more than I expected. Not because I missed the financial burden. I missed the illusion that my sacrifices meant something deeper to them. That's the dangerous part about becoming the reliable one. You start confusing usefulness with love. You think if I keep helping, eventually they'll appreciate me properly. But unhealthy people don't suddenly wake up one morning and develop gratitude because you overextended yourself for the 10th year in a row. Usually they just increase expectations. That's how exploitation becomes normal. It doesn't start dramatically. Nobody walks into your life wearing a shirt that says, "Hello, I plan to emotionally drain you." It happens slowly, a loan here, a favor there, a temporary situation, a family emergency. And because you're responsible, you step up. Then one day you realize you've become everybody's unpaid life manager, while still somehow being treated like the difficult one the moment you hesitate. That realization changed how I looked at my entire upbringing. Growing up, Brooke was always protected from discomfort. If she failed a class, it was because the teacher was unfair. If she overspent money, life was stressful. If she made reckless decisions, somebody else needed to support her emotionally. Meanwhile, every struggle I survived became proof that I didn't need help. That dynamic exists in a lot of families, especially for oldest kids. Military kids, financially responsible siblings or daughters raised to keep everybody emotionally stable. You become the emotional support beam, holding the ceiling up while everybody else gets to decorate the room. And after enough years, even you start believing that's your purpose. One thing I had to learn the hard way is this: being needed is not the same thing as being valued. Same. A lot of people only panic when reliable people stop volunteering. That's why boundaries upset unhealthy systems so much. Because boundaries expose dependency. The second I stopped funding my family quietly, the panic started immediately. Not concern for me. Not guilt over what happened. Panic over lost access. That distinction matters. And if you're watching this thinking, wow, this sounds familiar, I need you to pay attention to certain patterns in your own life. Who only calls you during emergencies? Who disappears when things are stable? Who expects help but acts irritated when you need support? Who uses guilt faster than gratitude? Those patterns tell you everything. One of the biggest mistakes responsible people make is assuming everybody thinks the way they do. We assume sacrifice creates mutual respect because that's how we operate. But manipulators often see sacrifice differently. To them, sacrifice becomes proof you'll tolerate more. That's why some people react angrily when you finally say no. Not because the boundary is unreasonable, because the unlimited access ended. I had to accept something painful after all of this. Part of the reason my family kept leaning on me financially was because I trained them to believe I always would. That doesn't excuse what they did. Not even close. Fraud is still fraud. Manipulation is still manipulation. But responsible people sometimes accidentally build the cage they eventually feel trapped inside. That's why boundaries have to start earlier than most people think. Not after burnout, not after betrayal. Before resentment becomes your entire personality. And let me say something that might help somebody listening right now. You are not cruel for wanting peace. You are not selfish for protecting your money. You are not abandoning people by refusing to finance bad decisions forever. A healthy relationship can survive the word no. An unhealthy relationship usually cannot. That's one of the clearest tests you'll ever get. After the situation with my family, I started noticing how many adults are exhausted because they're carrying responsibilities that were never truly theirs. Parents draining their kids financially, siblings expecting rescue packages every 6 months, relatives treating successful family members like community property. And society makes this worse sometimes, especially in families where loyalty gets confused with unlimited sacrifice. People will tell you that's still your family. Okay. And being related to someone does not automatically give them lifetime access to your finances, mental health, peace, or future. That lesson took me almost 30 years to learn. And honestly, I wish I had learned it sooner, because the moment I stopped trying to earn love through usefulness, my entire life started getting quieter in the best possible way. Less chaos, less guilt, less emotional debt disguised as loyalty. Real love does not require one person to constantly bleed so everybody else can stay comfortable. And being dependable is a beautiful quality, but only when you stop offering it to people who treat your strength like an unlimited resource instead of a human being. The strange part about finally setting boundaries is that the guilt doesn't disappear immediately, even when you know you're right, even when you have proof, even when the situation becomes so ridiculous it sounds fake when you explain it out loud. For a while after everything happened with my family, I still caught myself feeling guilty at random moments. Not because I thought I should have given Brooke the SUV, absolutely not. But because when you grow up being trained to keep everybody else comfortable, disappointing people feels unnatural. And I think a lot of viewers understand that feeling better than they admit, especially people raised in homes where peace mattered more than honesty. Some families don't actually teach boundaries. They teach emotional survival. Keep the peace. Don't upset your parents. Don't embarrass the family. Don't be selfish. Don't make things harder. Eventually, you become an adult who feels physically uncomfortable saying simple sentences like, "No, that's not my responsibility. I can't help with that." That crosses a line. And manipulative people absolutely know this. That's why they rarely approach you logically. They approach emotionally. Notice how nobody in my family ever said, "Harper, we know this is unfair, but we're asking for help." No. It was always wrapped in emotional language. Family helps family. Brooke is struggling. You embarrassed your sister. You've changed. You're being cold. That's how emotional manipulation works. The goal is to make boundaries feel morally wrong instead of necessary. And honestly, it works on responsible people all the time. Because responsible people usually have empathy. That's why manipulators target them in the first place. I remember about 2 weeks after the barbecue, my Aunt Sarah called me one evening. She meant well, but halfway through the conversation she sighed and said, "I just hate seeing the family divided like this." That sentence bothered me for days. Because somehow the division only became visible once I stopped absorbing the damage quietly. Nobody called the family divided while my identity was being stolen. Nobody called it toxic while I was financially supporting adults in silence. But the second I enforced consequences, suddenly everybody became deeply concerned about harmony. That happens a lot in dysfunctional families. The person exposing the problem becomes the problem, not because they caused the damage, because they interrupted denial. And if you grew up in a family like that, you probably learned another dangerous habit too, explaining yourself too much. I used to do that constantly, over-explaining boundaries, over-explaining decisions, over-explaining why something hurt me. You know why? Because when people repeatedly dismiss your feelings growing up, you start believing your boundaries require legal documentation before they deserve respect. That's exhausting. Healthy people usually don't require a 40-minute presentation explaining why fraud is bad. One thing I had to learn after all this was that boundaries are not negotiations, they're decisions. And honestly, some people will never respect your boundaries no matter how gently you explain them. Especially people who benefited from your lack of boundaries before. That part is important because when toxic people lose access to your time, money, emotional labor, or constant rescue missions, they often react like you attacked them personally. Not because you were wrong, because the arrangement stopped benefiting them. My mother still tried reaching out several times after the investigation started. Not to apologize, to regain control of the narrative. At one point, she literally said, "I hope you're happy destroying this family over paperwork." Paperwork. That's what she called identity theft. Like she accidentally submitted the wrong coupon at Bed Bath & Beyond. And honestly, that conversation taught me something valuable. Some people will minimize any damage they cause as long as minimizing it protects their self-image. That's why accountability feels impossible with certain personalities. Because admitting wrongdoing would require them to rebuild their entire identity from scratch. So instead, they attack your reaction. You're too sensitive, too harsh, too emotional, too unforgiving. Meanwhile, the actual behavior somehow becomes secondary. That's why I tell people now, stop confusing guilt with wrongdoing. Those are not the same thing. You can feel guilty while still making the correct decision, especially if you were conditioned to prioritize everyone else's comfort before your own safety. And let me give some practical advice here because I wish somebody had told me this years ago. Check your credit regularly. Protect your documents. Do not co-sign loans out of guilt. Do not mix financial dependency with emotional manipulation. And please pay attention to people who constantly live in temporary emergencies. Adults can struggle sometimes. That's normal. But there's a difference between somebody facing hardship and somebody building an identity around being rescued. One person wants solutions. The other wants access. That distinction can save you years of emotional exhaustion. The hardest truth I had to accept after all of this was that some relationships only survive while you're overfunctioning. The second you stop carrying everything, the relationship collapses because there was never mutual respect holding it together in the first place. That realization hurts. A lot. There were nights after the fallout where I sat alone in my townhouse, wondering if I had become too hard, too detached, too unforgiving. Then I'd remember something simple. Healthy people do not forge loans in your name. Healthy people do not threaten your reputation to protect themselves. Healthy people do not punish you for having boundaries. And suddenly the guilt became easier to sort through. Because loneliness is painful, but constant exploitation is worse. At least loneliness leaves room for peace. And peace feels unfamiliar at first when you spent your entire life managing chaos for other people. The longer I stayed away from my old family dynamic, the more I realized something almost nobody talks about honestly. Self-respect is usually a very quiet decision. People imagine self-respect as some dramatic movie scene where you deliver a perfect speech, walk away confidently, and suddenly feel powerful forever. That's not how it felt for me. Most of the time, self-respect looked boring. It looked like ignoring calls that would have ruined my peace. It looked like checking my credit report every month. It looked like sitting alone on a Friday night instead of attending another fake family gathering where everybody pretended dysfunction was tradition. It looked like protecting my future even when other people called it selfish. And honestly, that last part is where a lot of people get trapped, because society romanticizes sacrifice constantly, especially from responsible people. If you're hardworking, disciplined, financially stable, emotionally mature, or successful people, automatically assume you should carry more. More responsibility, more patience, more forgiveness, more sacrifice. And if you stop volunteering for that role suddenly, people act disappointed in you, like your boundaries ruined the group project. I noticed this especially after word spread through the extended family about what happened. Some relatives quietly supported me, others acted uncomfortable because my decision forced them to confront truths they had spent years avoiding. A few even hinted that I should have handled things more privately. That one always makes me laugh, because apparently identity theft should stay private. But my financial support was expected to stay public forever. Interesting standard. One thing I had to accept was that protecting yourself financially makes some people deeply uncomfortable, especially people who benefited from your lack of protection before. The moment you stop being endlessly accessible, manipulative people suddenly start describing you as different. And technically, they're right. You are different. You're harder to use. That's usually the real issue. I also learned something important about forgiveness. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. A lot of people confuse those two ideas. You can forgive somebody internally without reopening access to your life. You can let go of bitterness without volunteering for more damage. And honestly, I think people need to hear that more often. Because some relationships are unhealthy specifically because there were never consequences. Every time somebody crossed a line, the family reset the scoreboard emotionally and acted like moving on automatically meant healing. It doesn't. Sometimes moving on just means the healthiest person in the room got tired of arguing. Real healing usually requires accountability first. And accountability feels offensive to people who built their identity around avoiding it. That's exactly what happened with my mother. Even after the investigation ended, Evelyn still framed herself as misunderstood instead of responsible. At one point, she actually told a relative, Harper chose money over family, which is honestly incredible considering she literally committed fraud over money. But that's how manipulation works sometimes. People rewrite reality until they become the victim of consequences they created themselves. And if you spend enough years around personalities like that, you start questioning your own sanity. That's why documentation matters. That's why boundaries matter. That's why protecting yourself matters. Not because you're paranoid, because denial is expensive. One of the biggest lessons I hope people take from my story is this. Financial abuse inside families is way more common than most people realize. It just doesn't always look dramatic at first. Sometimes it looks like guilt. Sometimes it looks like temporary help. Sometimes it looks like parents borrowing money they never repay. Sometimes it looks like siblings expecting access to your home, your credit, your time, or your emotional energy forever. And because it's family, people minimize it. They tell you to be understanding, patient, compassionate. But compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction eventually. I had to learn that the hard way. There's also something else nobody warns you about after you stop rescuing people. Your nervous system changes. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. After the fallout with my family, I started sleeping better. My anxiety dropped. I stopped feeling immediate panic every time my phone rang late at night. I stopped bracing myself for somebody else's emergency. Do you know how strange it feels to realize peace used to make you uncomfortable because chaos had become normal? That realization changed my entire perspective on adulthood. For years, I thought strength meant endurance. Now I think real strength is discernment. Knowing who deserves access to your life. Knowing when help becomes enablement. Knowing when loyalty becomes self-betrayal. And maybe most importantly, knowing when somebody keeps confusing your kindness with permission. That's why I don't regret the bus pass. People think that moment was about revenge. It wasn't. It was the first honest boundary I had ever set with my family, without immediately apologizing for it afterward. That little $2 bus pass represented something much bigger. It was me finally refusing to carry adults who refuse to walk on their own. And if there's one thing I want people watching this to remember, it's this. You are allowed to protect what you worked hard to build. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to outgrow toxic roles people assigned to you when you were younger. And you do not owe unlimited access to people simply because you share DNA. Real love can survive boundaries. Manipulation cannot. That difference will tell you everything you need to know about the people around you. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever dealt with toxic family dynamics, emotional manipulation, financial exploitation, or the guilt that comes with finally standing up for yourself, share your experience in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family boundaries, accountability, and self-respect.